Hello, and welcome back to Criminal Minds.
I'm Olga.
And I am Svetlana. And today, on November 1st, 1854, we are investigating the criminal mind of Rodion Romanovich,
a.k.a. Raskolnikov, the axe-murderer of Alyona and Lizaveta Ivanova.
So, take a look. We have the exclusive clip of his confession to patrol policeman Ilya Petrovich. Take a look. You do not look well. Sit on the chair.
It was I.
Drink water.
No water. It was I who killed the old pawnbroker and his sister Lizaveta. It was I who killed them with an axe and robbed them. Oh, snap! Now we are going to Svetlana. She is interviewing Porfiry, the chief investigator in the case of the murder.
Thank you, Olga. And here I am with Porfiry, the investigator of the case. Porfiry, you've always known that Raskolnikov was the murderer. Why do you think that he didn't confess?
I've been at the police station many years, and I've seen many cases like Raskolnikov. It's almost if the criminal wants to take the suffering upon himself.
So he doesn't confess because he wants to continue the suffering inside himself.
Yes, he almost thrives on it. He has to have the suffering and able to deal with the murder.
Okay, so you think that he did not confess because he was thriving off of it. And that is why when you gave him multiple opportunities to confess, he did not.
The final time I asked him to confess, I even gave him a chance to get the reduction of sentence, but he wouldn't take it. He wanted to continue suffering. It was almost as if taking away part of his jail time would cause him to stop suffering and stop being the Superman that he thinks he is.
What a puzzling specimen he is. Back to you, Olga.
Thank you, Svetlana, for that interesting interview. I don't know what Raskolnikov was thinking. I would want a reduction of sentence.
Yes, wouldn't you? I would too. It was a very good interview, I would say. What I found most interesting, for me, was how just like you and I, average Joes, we would want to end our suffering right away and just get the jail time over with.
Yes.
But he wanted to prolong it. Well, now we will go to your interview that you had with Sonia, the lover of Raskolnikov.
Welcome, Sonia.
Hello.
Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
We have a few questions for you about Raskolnikov. How are the conditions here in Siberia, where Raskolnikov was sentenced to his jail time, different than in St. Petersburg?
Well, as you can see here, here in Siberia it is much more open and colder, full of wind. As you can see, you had to wear your windsuit here today, Olga.
Yeah.
And I'm dressed very warm. So yes, it is much more open here in Siberia than in Petersburg, where it is much more confined. And in his room, it was very small and cramped, which is very much like symbolic of his idea of his square yard of space.
Square yard of space? What is that?
Oh, well, the square yard of space is what he called it. It was a little, how you say, box that he was almost standing on. It's as if he was standing over a cliff, and he was stay in that square yard of space over the ocean and the abyss. And if he took a step outside of that square yard, he would die, obviously, because he would jump off the cliff. But the square yard of space, if he stood in it, it's as if living in anticipation of dying, as opposed to just stepping off and dying, getting it over with. It was better to live like this than to die at that moment. To live and to live and to live, no matter how you live, just to live.
We recently interviewed Porfiry, and he said that he offered Raskolnikov a reduction of sentence. Do you think Raskolnikov's theory of the square yard of space is related to him not taking Porfiry's reduction?
Very, very much so, because if he was standing in that little square yard of space, that was where he was suffering. He was living in anticipation of the end of his suffering, or in his suffering. And if he stepped out of it, if he took that reduction of sentence, he would in turn be stepping out of the square yard, except now that he has stepped out of it, we have seen a change in him.
Oh, thank you, Sonia. We will be back with you later. Back to you, Svetlana.
Thank you, Olga. And it was an interesting thing, his square yard of spaces. It must be like his misery that he said breathed something permanent, eternal, foretelling hopeless years of this cold and deathly misery, foretelling a kind of eternity on a square yard of space.
Oh, yes. That square yard of space, that was very interesting, wasn't it?
I would certainly say so.
And now we are going to a live interview with Raskolnikov.
Thank you, Olga. Here I am in my live interview down in the studio with none other than his old friend, Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov, we just talked to Sonia, his lover, and she talked about Sonia. And she talked about the difference between Raskolnikov pre-confession and post-confession. Now I'd like to talk to you about him pre-crime, pre-murder, and post-murder.
Well, I knew Raskolnikov from school, and he never was a very lively guy. But after the murder, which I didn't know he had committed, he had become more isolated, more standoffish, and he became so isolated that he wasn't even concerned with what directly affected him.
So what do you think caused this isolation?
His suffering caused his isolation, and the restraints of the square yard of space that he kept himself in caused this suffering.
Back to you, Olga.
And now for more of my interview with Sonia. We are now back with Sonia. Sonia, earlier we talked about how the conditions were different in which Raskolnikov was in, but now how has Raskolnikov changed since he has been in Siberia?
Well, like I said, his room was like his square yard of space, and he was his square yard of space. So his room reflected what he was like. He was closed in, he was hemmed in, grasping for air inside of that square yard of suffering in his room. But now that he has confessed, and he is in this more open area, it's very, it's like he has become the air around him. He's looking towards the future. He's looking positively as opposed to dreading every moment just getting by. So it is like night and day between his suffering in a square yard, because when he stepped out of his square yard, he did not die, and in turn he did the opposite, and he has lived.
Oh, I understand. Thank you, Sonia, and I hope the best for you too in the future.
Thank you, Olga. And what a wonderful round of interviews we have just had for Raskolnikov, eh?
Right.
It showed us how, pre-confession, he lived in a gloomy sensation of infinite, tormented solitude.
And after confession, it was almost as if his square yard of space and suffering had disappeared.
It is just like that. Well, that concludes our segment of Criminal Minds, looking into the criminal mind of Raskolnikov. I'm Svetlana.
And I'm Olga.
What do Russians say when they say goodbye?